Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast. Most performance problems don't show up as learning problems. They show up as mixed execution, slow decisions, or capability that disappears the moment pressure shows up. But beneath almost every breakdown is the same issue: how people have been prepared to think and act when information is complete, attention is scarce, and the stakes are real. My guest today is Nancy Harhut, who has distinguished herself in a crowded marketing landscape by uniquely combining award-winning creative leadership at top global agencies with the rigor of behavioral science. Rather than relying on generic best practices, Nancy applies data-driven, psychologically sound principles that explain why people act instinctively and how small changes in framing can dramatically change outcomes. Her practical, no-nonsense approach, often described as her secret sauce, behind higher response rates, faster decisions, and stronger loyalty is captured in her best-selling book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. In this episode, we break down how leading with emotion accelerates action, why loss aversion outperforms promised gains, and how credible social proof reduces risk when people are uncertain. These aren't marketing tactics, they're cognitive realities that show up everywhere leaders are trying to influence behavior, whether with customers, teams, or change initiatives. So if you're interested in ideas that sound good, well, this episode may challenge you. But if you're interested in ideas that transfer to real-world performance, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. Welcome to the program, Nancy.
Charles, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I always like to start with this question to let our listeners know more about you. Tell us more about your background and really what got you interested on this topic.
Yeah, so I've been an agency person for quite some time. I came up on the copy side. I was a copywriter and worked my way up to creative director and executive creative director. But at one point, a mentor of mine recommended a book called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And when I finally got around to reading the book, it was eye-opening because I was reading the book and I was highlighting things and making margin notes. And I'm thinking about all of the challenges that I was working on for the clients I had at the time. One was trying to get, more subscribers to a newspaper. One was trying to get people to buy more life insurance, things like that. And I was like, oh, this might work and this might work. And so I started to quietly test some of these tactics. And I began to see the results. And I was like, all right, this, we're onto something here. And then, had one like incredible test where a client really had a problem, came to us, and it was like a make it or break it thing. You guys going to win the business or are we going to go elsewhere? And we hit it out of the park. And I was like, this is it. This is the way to go, and never look back. So just this idea of taking marketing best practices, things that we know work in the marketplace, and combining them with the behavioral science, the decision-making shortcuts that we know our customers and prospects use. That 1-2 combination provides such, an incredible opportunity, I guess I should say, for businesses to increase the likelihood that people open, read, and respond to their marketing messages.
Couldn't agree with you more. But many leaders think they already know their customer. So what are some high-cost mistakes you have seen from smart, experienced CMOs that ignore behavior science, and what does that cost them in terms of missed opportunities?
People say that they know their customers, and to a certain extent they do. Anytime I work with a client, I will always say, obviously, you know more about your customers, more about your product than I do. I'm just coming on, I'm the agency, you're the client, and they do. They know a lot about their market. But the mistake they make in ignoring behavioral science is twofold. One, they're less likely to really connect with their target market, to really create a message that resonates. They'll skim some of the cream off the top. The message will get out there. Somebody who's like, oh, this is exactly what I needed. It just popped up in front of me on my screen, at the right time. Great. But there's a lot of, conversion that doesn't happen when somebody's not exactly ready to respond. And because businesses haven't leaned into behavioral science, they haven't crafted that message that's really going to resonate. And as a result, they don't get the conversion. Because there are two things that we can't ignore. One is people rely on decision-making shortcuts. They just do. Your customers, your prospects, they rely on these decision-making shortcuts. And the second thing is we can prompt them. As marketers, as business people, we can prompt them. So it's a surefire way to increase business by just embracing some of these proven behavioral science tactics.
I would agree with you. And so ignoring behavior science is costly. So the natural follow up is, what are a few ideas that actually move the needle the fastest? So if you were briefing a time starved CMO, chief marketing officer, or business owner in an elevator, how would you explain one or two behavior science ideas that would change their marketing results in the next quarter?
Listen, I get it. You want to provide a list of features and benefits so that people can absorb them, rationally weigh the pros and cons, and come to the logical decision that you're the right choice. I get it. That makes perfect sense. However, it's not how people behave. What you need to do is you need to work with the brain and not against it. And the brain is all about decision making shortcuts. And so, what you need to do is you need to tap into the 95% of decision making that happens in the subconscious mind and kind of nudge or prompt people to do what you want them to do. And there are proven ways to do this. They've been proven in the market. They've been proven by academics, by behavioral science research, and that's what you want to tap into. But how people make decisions isn't the way you think they make them.
Love that. So let's unpack those principles one at a time, starting with emotion, because that's the engine that drives everything else. So you emphasize that emotion drives action and reason justifies it after the fact. What does this reordering of emotion and reason change about how leaders should think about their strategy, their brand, and their messaging?
Well, the biggest thing is they need to lean into emotion. I know some brands, particularly B2B ones, where they think there's absolutely no spot, no role whatsoever for emotion. People make decisions for the good of the company. And certainly they do. It's not exclusively that, right? Even the B2B Institute says that when you add emotion to a marketing message to a B2B target, you get 7 times the revenue, the sales, and the profitability. 7 times, right? What we need to do is we need to embrace emotion and we need to lead with it because people make the decision, as you noted, for emotional reasons, and then they quickly justify that decision to themselves and to other people with the rational reasons. So we want those rational reasons, but we just have to have them in the right place. We want to capture somebody's attention. We want to prompt that initial response with the emotion and then provide the information that they can point to and say, this is why that's a sound decision.
And it means strategy and brand can't be built on features alone. Features and benefits, I hear that focus on so much. They have to be built on feelings. So the question shifts from what do we want to tell people to what do we want them to feel about us and themselves when they choose us? Because research shows emotions are processed faster than rational thought and remembered better, which is why emotional responses drive buying behaviors.
You're absolutely right. Not what do we want them to think about us? What do we want them to feel about us? Because people make those decisions emotionally. People process emotions more quickly. They remember them. It's not that we should walk away from features and benefits. We don't want to do that. We want those features and benefits, but we want them in the right place. But the first question, as you say, is how do we want to make people feel? What do we want to help them solve? Do they want to feel exhilarated? Do they want to feel relieved? Do they want to feel triumphant? Do they want to feel smart? Do they want to feel accepted? There are so many different angles depending on who your market is and what your product is. But thinking about that is what's going to get you where you want to go.
And what I like about your approach is you give actionable advice. It's not just theoretical. So some of what you have stated is to make it more emotional, prompt your prospect into imagining how good it will feel to save time or personal effort by using your product or service. Use pictures or colors to elicit emotional responses, or point out a painful situation that your target can avoid by adopting your product, which combines emotions and loss aversion, which we'll get into shortly.
Yes, yeah, and you used a very important word there, Charles. You said imagine. And imagine is so powerful for us because when you ask someone to imagine something, right away their defenses go down because it's imagination land, right? It's not reality. I'm just asking you to imagine something. So we're all like, okay, great. I'm going to imagine, right? Then I'll go along for the ride. This will be fun. So you ask someone to imagine something right away, their defenses go down. They don't feel like they're going to be, pushed or sold or anything. But then the second thing that happens is when you ask someone to imagine something, imagine what you would do with an extra 5 hours a week in your week. You're going to figure out exactly, you're going to imagine exactly what you do with that 5 hours. When I ask you to imagine something, you create the perfect customized mental picture for yourself. And once you create that mental picture, you don't want to give it up. It's going to actually lead very nicely into this idea of loss aversion. Like once you imagine it to your brain, it almost seems real and you don't want to give it up. So getting someone to imagine what they would do, how they would benefit from using your product or becoming your customer, they create that mental image and suddenly it feels very real and they don't want to part with it.
So once you accept that emotion sits at the driver's seat, then one of the strongest emotional levers you talk about is loss, specifically loss aversion. Loss aversion is that recurring theme that people are more motivated to avoid loss than pursue gain because the majority of people are loss adverse. What are the biggest mistakes you have seen when companies try to use loss framing? And what does good loss framing look like? Because people might argue with you, Nancy, to say it's better to paint a positive picture than a negative one.
It absolutely, and I've heard that argument many times. And, we know that benefits and advantages work, but a little well-placed loss aversion can go a long way, whether it's, the pain you can avoid if you do what I'm asking you to do, or the pain you might find yourself in if you don't do what I'm asking you to do. A colleague of mine tested a headline, and it was for a company that provided ISO certification. And will your company pass? Versus ISO certification, will your company fail? Now, the company was obviously going to make sure you pass, so you would think you would go with the first one. Will your company pass? That's the benefit. That's what I'm selling. That's how. That's why you would become my customer. And yet, in the head-to-head test, will your company fail? Far outperformed will your company pass, because we're trying to, not make the same mistake someone else did. We're trying to avoid that pain. I did some work for a client. They sold retirement funds, and they were trying to get people to invest more in retirement funds. And they used loss aversion. They said, "Do you make these common retirement mistakes?" And we tested that against a couple of other approaches, but this was the one that did really well. And we ended up driving a 35% increase in sales. Right? Again, not in inquiries, not in, "Oh, I'm gonna go to the website and read a little bit more," but in actual sales. But, people don't wanna make the same mistakes other people do, but as marketers, what we need to do is when we're pointing out to someone that they're, possibly making a mistake, that they might be losing out on something because they're doing something wrong, we then have to kind of close the circle and explain, "But we can help you." Because if you point out to someone, "You're losing 500 customers every week," they might just throw up their hands and go, "I'm doing the best I can. I don't know what else to do. You're telling me I screwed up. I don't know what to do." Right? I guess I'm losing 500 customers a week. But if you say to someone, "You're making this mistake, but I can help you fix it. I can help you solve it." You kind of extend your hand, say, "Come with me. I'll help you to get to a good place." That is like an unbeatable combination. Here's the problem, the loss, if you will, and here's how together we're going to solve it. So that's the correct way to use it.
So don't discount benefits, but inject a little bit of negativity in your advertising because, like you said, and it's supported by research, people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. So if you only focus on the benefits, then make sure they're true, genuine customer benefits. But I like how you turn this on its head to say that remember that from your vantage point of your customer or prospect, providing them the ability to avoid a loss or to dodge a painful outcome is actually a benefit in and of itself. And from a behavior science perspective, that particular benefit is even more compelling than the traditional positive one.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you said use the term negativity, and that's one that a lot of us worry. Like, "Oh, I don't want it to be negative, make it more positive." But sometimes negative works. Sometimes negative works. And as long as we use it the right way.
Loss aversion can become a very powerful behavior science principle that you leverage, and it can be combined with many of the other ones that we're going to discuss. And the next one it could be even combined with, and that's the endowment effect. How does the book suggest marketers design experiences so customers genuinely feel ownership earlier in that journey?
Yeah, so this whole idea of the endowment effect is really very interesting, right? We value things more when they're ours, or when we think of them as ours, which goes back to that word imagined. Imagine being our customer and not having to work those extra 5 hours, right? When we think of something as ours, we value it more. If there's something that we want to acquire, obviously we value it. That's why we want to acquire it. But once it becomes ours, it's worth more to us. If I were going to sell my house, the real estate agent would say, "All right, Nancy, I'm going to run the comps. We're going to find out what comparable properties in your neighborhood, your square footage, your condition, what they're selling for. And based on that data, we'll know what to put your house on the market for." The real estate agent would call me up and say, "All right, Nancy, we're putting your house on the market for X." And I would be like, "X, no, it's too low. Higher, higher. It should be higher." Why? Because it's my house. I value it more. So in a B2B, we can invite people to help configure a product, right? Or we can ask people, even in a B2B or B2C, to help customize the product that we're selling. Maybe choose the color, choose the design. And it doesn't have to be unlimited. We can offer a range, but any little bit of input where we can involve that prospective customer up front. I want these features and not these. I want this color and not that one. I want the stripes, not the checks. Whatever it is, it gets people invested in it. They help create it. And as a result, they value it more. So those are, a couple of ways to pull people in and trigger that idea of the endowment effect.
We fall in love always with what we already have, and we focus more on what we might lose as a result than what we might gain. And I think the big distinction here is that we assume other people will see that transaction from our same perspective as well, but they don't. So that's always critical to think of when you're looking at these things, especially I see this a lot when people are selling stuff, whether it's in garage sales, estate sales, they mark it up way too high because they have that ownership and that endowment effect is taking place in their mind to say, this is worth more than what other people value it as because it's mine. And I see all these intangible benefits that I assume other people see, which they really don't.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like I said, if I were going to sell my house, it would be like, no, no, it should, the real estate agent has the data, and I'm still saying no, no. But you know what else that factors in there is the idea of emotion that we talked about a little bit earlier, because there's so many emotions tied up with my house or with this product or with this thing that I'm selling at the garage sale. Like, oh, I've had it for years, and we overvalue it. All that emotion is tied up into it, and the fact that it's ours, and the rest of the world wouldn't pay nearly as much, but because it's ours, we think it's worth more.
I also see that a lot with companies offering a free or discounted trial of the product or service because once people begin to use it, they will start to think of it as theirs. And this is even more true if they're using it and adding their own personal data to it, that they have that virtual ownership already and they feel like, well, I'm not going to give it away. I'm just going to have to buy then the full subscription, right? Or buy the product and the trial versions, the discounted, the free samples work brilliantly in that regard. Also, you talk about the IKEA effect, which I think is interesting because it's somewhat counterintuitive. You wouldn't expect that the more work you put into something, the more ownership you feel about it and the less likely you're willing to give it up.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's named after, the retailer IKEA that's famous for like shipping things flat and you get it home and you're the one who has to assemble that coffee table or that bookcase and it does take a lot of effort, many people will say, but you put so much into it that it then becomes worth more to you. It's crazy. It really is. There was a great example with Hootsuite recently. They went from their free service to their paid. They were going to get rid of the free, and so I got this email from them and they said, so you have two choices now. You can upgrade to the paid account because we're removing the free, or you could check out. But if you check out, you're going to lose all of your posts. You're going to lose all of your scheduled posts, and you're no longer going to have access to this account. So you had the loss aversion, you had the endowment effect, and the next thing you know, I'm like, okay, sign me up, right? They did a great job with it because I was used to using it, so it was part of my routine. And then, telling me what I was going to lose by not upgrading, access to all of the stuff that already scheduled and all the stuff I'd already posted, and then it was almost as an aside, and by the way, you can't re-access once you're done, you're done. It's like, mm-mm, not doing this. Loss aversion, endowment effect. Sign me up.
Love that. Well, once people feel something is theirs, and the next logical move is to make access to that feel scarce in time or availability, which brings us to scarcity and exclusivity. So, scarcity is that classic principle, but if you split it into urgency and exclusivity, it makes it even more powerful. So, what's the big strategic insight does that distinction unlock for leaders?
Sure. So a lot of times, when people hear scarcity, they right away go to limited quantity or limited time. So we're having a sale, but it ends on this deadline, or we have these, for sale, but once they're gone, limited quantity. And that's great. And those are, both forms of urgency, both forms of scarcity. If you don't quickly access, if you don't quickly buy, you're going to be left out in the cold. But oftentimes we don't think about the other end of it, which is the idea of exclusivity, which is, yes, this is available, but only to certain people, not to everyone. Or you're being offered this because of who you are. Not everyone is getting this. And that can make something very appealing. If we know that we have early access to something, or we have access to benefits other people don't have, or we can purchase something that not everyone can purchase at the time. We like to, kind of lord that over our friends and family. Oh, well, I have this, or I get this. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel special. And as a result, it can be very, very powerful. So even if you have something that you're going to roll out and make available to everyone, you might want to initially only make it available to a certain group of people, members of this professional association or this trade group, or people who have purchased from you before, or people who signed up for, advance notice, but just letting people feel that specialness. And then, eventually, sure, you can make it available to everyone, but taking advantage of that idea of exclusivity, because we want things that not everyone else can have.
Well, some great action items that you mentioned in the book for urgency, pop headlines and expiration dates when you have them. Responses will increase when the deadline nears. If you don't have a hard and fast deadline, imply one. For example, you could use the phrase, please respond this week. Replies requested in 5 days for a limited time only. And then you give some great words to use to really convey urgency. The number one is free. So make sure you use that right language. And then for exclusivity, provide prospects with a VIP code you mentioned or a personalized identification number that's associated with their special offer. Give them special discounts, upgrades, or complimentary services or free gifts. And grant them access, inside details, or special previews for something they care about or something that you are about to launch. So, great actionable ways that put these principles into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like sometimes we're so busy just trying to get our product out into the marketplace, and we think, all right, I've got a good product, I've got the right price, I've carefully, defined my market, I should be good to go. But you stop and think and go, wait a minute, I could give myself an extra advantage if I employ some of these behavioral science techniques, like the idea of exclusivity or the idea of scarcity. And you just have to know when to use them and in what way to deploy them, and it can really make a big difference.
Have you seen any from your experience of some powerful ways to build genuine urgency and exclusivity into offers? Or perhaps maybe what are some of the warning signs that a company is overusing these tactics and it could backfire on them?
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up. It's a really good question. And I appreciate your asking it because it applies not to just this specific behavioral science principle, but kind of to the topic at large. Behavioral scientists have proven that people rely on these decision making shortcuts, that they have these automatic, instinctive, hardwired behaviors. And as marketers, as business people, we can prompt them or trigger them. And we're talking about how to do that right now with some of these tactics. The one thing we have to always keep top of mind is just because we can do something doesn't mean we should, which is to say, you don't want to lie. You don't want to misuse these. You want to always be an ethical, responsible marketer. So we're talking about scarcity. Sure, if I say there's only 50 of these left, a lot more people might quickly respond. But if I have a back room that has 150 of them, I'm a liar. And eventually that gets out. And when that gets out, when someone realizes that they've been misled by you, it destroys trust, and it's almost impossible to rebuild. It's certainly very, very difficult, and you just don't wanna be there, right? So you don't wanna say something that you wouldn't tell your good friend or your family member, right? You wanna treat people with respect. You wanna use these ethically and responsibly. So you can still move people along, but you're doing it in an ethical and honest way. Because again, once you destroy the trust, it's almost impossible to rebuild it.
That's an important point. You're right. Over time, audiences learn not to trust the signal. And what could have been a powerful motivator becomes noise that damages credibility instead of building it, which no company wants. So scarcity works best when it's embedded in a broader relationship with how the customer already feels hopefully valued. So that brings us into reciprocity. What happens when you give before you ask? And the book argues that giving first without explicit strings attached is preferred, and it can be a powerful driver of response and loyalty.
The idea of the reciprocity principle is really interesting. And that is when someone does something for us, does us a favor, gives us a gift, whether or not we asked for it, we feel obliged to even the score. We want to answer in kind. We want to, give something back. There was an experiment done in, I think it was Latin America at a McDonald's. And what the researchers did is when parents came in with their kids, they either handed the parents a balloon for the child on the way in, or they handed them a balloon for the child on the way out. And at the end of the experiment, what the researchers found was that people spent 25% more at the counter, at the McDonald's counter, when they were handed a balloon on the way in. Because they didn't ask for the balloon, but they walked in and someone was, handing them a balloon and, the kid was happy with it. They go to the counter and they order a little bit more just to kind of even the score. When they were handed the balloon on the way out, well, they'd already ordered. The transaction was over. They weren't going to go running back in going, oh my gosh, I need another hamburger. So just the idea of when we do something for someone, the idea of give to get, they want to return the favor. And sometimes they do it immediately. Sometimes they can't, but it stays with them and they look for a way. And sometimes they're so focused on trying to return the favor that they actually end up returning in a bigger way. So giving someone something with the long term, expectation that eventually it may pay off is a very good thing to do. And that's different than an incentive, which is if you do X, I'll give you Y. If you buy this, I'll give you 10% off. If you buy this, I'll give you a free upgrade. Those work. Those are incentives, but there's a certain expectation. Whereas giving to get, we're kind of no strings attached. Doing the right thing is going to pay off for us. And it often does. I know a guy named Jay Schwedelson. He runs Outcome Media Group. He has something called subjectline.com. So you can go online and you can test your subject line for free. You enter it, they give you a numerical score, and they give you some pointers to raise your score. Absolutely free. So I said, Jay, how's it going? I mean, you're giving all this stuff away. And he said, Nancy, we love giving back to the community. We love the fact that it cements us as a thought leader in the community. And we love the fact that we get about 2 new pieces of business a day. Who are you going to hire? You're going to hire the person who's been helping you all along. And that's the beauty of the reciprocity principle.
And provide them with something that they value, like you mentioned, something that they may not have asked for, but will appreciate either because it's useful, it feels personal or enjoyable, or it can be in the form of a gift or in the form of service. But the key is to provide it first, since that paves the way for the reciprocity principle to work in your advantage. Robert Cialdini talks about this a lot in his book Influence. But you want to make sure, like you mentioned before, that you're doing this for the right reasons. It's not being done so that you have people beholden to you and you use it to your advantage. It's making sure that it's targeted, it's personalized, it's relevant, so that they feel like it's a value and you're not expecting anything in return.
You're in it for the long game. I'm doing the right thing. And I just believe that if you're doing the right thing, karma works and it comes back at you. And to your point about it being, useful and relevant, I mean, we're not in the trash and trinkets business.
So once you're giving value and building goodwill, the next question customers usually ask, often unconsciously, is, have people like me succeeded with you? That's where social proof comes in and authority comes in. So you distinguish between broad social proof, people like you, and authority. Here's what experts say. So for a professional audience, when is it more effective to lean on peer proof versus expert authority?
So it's interesting because both work, and you might want one in certain circumstances and another in another circumstance. So if you're brand new and you're looking for kind of like a boost in credibility, that's when you might maybe want authority. You might want to say, oh, we're endorsed by the American Dental Association, or we were featured in Time Magazine, or generally speaking, people really value information from their peers because it's someone like me. So if you can start to lean into social proof, people like me have used this, people like me have done this. We look at that and we're like, oh, all right, that's someone like me. And I can almost better believe that or get my head around that. And so I think there's a role for both the authority principle and the idea of social proof, endorsements coming from peers. But there's definitely an increased believability with peer reviewed things.
When I've seen it too, when people are trying to decide, especially when faced with a choice they've never had to think about before in an ambiguous situation, they use what other people similar to them did as a guide to show them how to behave. That similarity can have a fairly broad definition, ranging from people in their neighborhood to people that they came into contact with at the hotel they're staying at. So it doesn't have to be just close friends. But I find by far and large, time and time again, when people are uncertain, they assume others know more than they do. And as a result, the smart move is to make the same choices other people have made. Hopefully that safety in numbers approach, right, keeps on coming up. And they think, well, if they've done it, then it must be a good decision. I see that a lot when I've traveled and I'm looking for restaurants. And there's two restaurants, one with a long line, one with no line. Well, I assume the one with the long line, I'm probably going to prefer that one just because of social proof.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, that happened to me when I was in Spain. A friend of mine saw me posting on Facebook that I was in Spain, and she wrote, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, Nancy, I to this day dream about this incredible restaurant that I used to go to when I was in Barcelona." So I was like, "Oh, well, what is it?" And she gives me the name, and I look, and it is walking distance to the hotel. So I'm like, "I've got to go." So I'm on my way to the restaurant. I'm crossing the hotel lobby, and the concierge stops me and says, "Oh, where you headed?" And I said, "Oh, I'm, going out to dinner." "Well, where are you going?" I give the name of the restaurant. And the concierge goes, "Oh, that's right next door to this other restaurant," which gave me pause. So I said, "Oh, well, is this other restaurant better?" And, the concierge was very polite and politic and said, "Oh, they're both very good. Some people like the one I just mentioned because it's a little different, but, both of them are very good." And it's like, "Oh, okay, thank you." And so I thought, well, I don't know, maybe they get a kickback for recommending the restaurant or something. They're next door to each other. I'm going to go and take a look. So I get there, and as I'm approaching, there's this huge line in front of one of them, and no one at the other. And I get closer, and I realize there is nobody at the one that the concierge recommended, and there's this big line in front of the one that my friend recommended. So I'm like, all right, big line and recommendation from a friend. This is where I'm going. Have this fabulous meal, but then Charles, I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to have to walk back through the lobby. The concierge is going to say, "Hey, Nancy, American, how was the restaurant?" And I don't want to disappoint them. So I decided I'm going to go and I'm going to have dessert there. I come out of the first restaurant. The restaurant the concierge recommended is mobbed. There is such a huge line in front of it, and I kind of, wiggle my way up. I get to the hostess stand. Is there room for two, table for two? And she said, I literally just had a cancellation. And she was able to seat me, which was amazing. There was like a little two top right behind the hostess stand. Had a fabulous meal, and I think the thing was different people went to different restaurants. I think the after work crowd went where my friend had recommended that had the initially long line, and then I think in Barcelona people eat dinner later. So then there was like a whole nother crowd at the other restaurant, but it was so funny. I'm like, there's no line here. They must be getting a kickback for recommending it because no one eats there. And then you come out and it's like, oh my gosh, it's just filled to the gills. Yeah, social proof is it's a very common decision making shortcut.
So the question I have to ask is which restaurant in the end was better?
They were both really good, but I have to say the concierge was not wrong when she said this one that I just mentioned is just different. They do things differently. So you're going to have, wonderful food at the one you're going to, but they put a certain spin on this one I'm recommending.
Well, some of the actionable ways that you mentioned that how leaders and companies can use this is provide case studies and a list of satisfied customers on their website or in their marketing. Highlight the number of users, subscribers, tweets, views, likes, followers, downloads that you have, or use descriptions such as the popular choice, the fastest growing, the most requested, the best selling. I remember this on a documentary, Nancy, and I think it's pretty apropos here is when Jello first came out in the 1950s, no one knew what it was. They had no idea what it was. It was on shelves, it wasn't selling. And they'd made one marketing change to it that made it very fast selling. And that was it's America's favorite dessert. No one knew what it was. But just that social proof caused people to change their mind. Hey, I'm going to give it a try because if other people like it, maybe I do as well. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I love it because you're thinking, oh, wow, everyone must be eating it. I guess just I'm the one who doesn't. We actually think that they must know something we don't. And if I don't do it, I'm going to be missing out. There's almost a little bit of that loss aversion in there. Like if it's America's favorite dessert and I'm an American and I haven't tasted it yet, what am I missing? The other interesting thing about social proof, though, is if you can introduce a little bit of skepticism, that's a really good thing to do because, people are they're suspicious and if everything is like the best thing since sliced bread. But if you can start out with, I wasn't sure it was going to be worth the price, but I decided to try it anyway on a trial basis. Now I'll never leave. Somebody else is going to be reading that thinking, yeah, I wasn't really sure about the price either. This person thought the same thing I did and now they're happy. I could be happy too. I think I'll give it a try.
You're right. Make those objections known and answer them before they bring them up to you. From another guest, he had a great framework, the feel, felt, found framework. I feel, I know you feel this way. I felt that way as well, but here's what I found, right? Because you're answering it. It's more credible. It's more authentic. It's not just a rosy depiction of what your product does. It's answering some of the objections that probably any customer or potential customer of yours might have. I'd like to get back to what you said earlier about the era of fake reviews and AI written case studies. How can brands structure their social proof to feel credible, specific, and believable rather than generic and staged? Because this is becoming more and more of a problem. You just don't know what's real versus what's fake. And I would argue that as AI gets better, it's going to be really hard to tell.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. You are not wrong about that. A couple of things. One is specifics outpull generalities. So the more specific we can be, as opposed to vague, the more concrete language we can use, as opposed to something that's more abstract. The better off we're going to be. So if we're talking about reviews and social proof, we want the ones that have that very specific language. As I also just mentioned, the ones that maybe expressed a little bit of skepticism ahead of time, that resonates too, because those are the ones that sound really human. They're the ones that don't sound like they're AI generated because there's like specific detail and there's somebody's individual story. And maybe there's even somebody's hesitation or doubt that was initially present. And that's a great way to make sure that your testimonials and the social proof bits that you're using are gonna resonate. The other interesting thing is a lot of times we're like when we ask people to rank our products or rate our products, I should say, say, hey, give us a 5-star review if you've been happy. And we think, well, we're asking for 5 stars, but only if they've been happy, but we're pushing for that 5 stars. And there was a study that came out of Northwestern University that found that the optimum number of stars isn't 5. It's somewhere between 4.2 and 4.7 because basically what you're saying is, look, you can't please all the people all the time. If you're up there in those fours, it means you're doing pretty good. If you have nothing but 5-star reviews, people think, it's only bots. It's, the marketer is paying for the views, the marketer is pulling down the bad ones. And so, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to present this perfect, pristine, beautifully polished picture. Like, it's okay that not everybody loves us. It's okay that somebody wasn't sure that we would be the right choice. The more authentic, the more real we can be, the better it is for us as marketers.
Before we close, it's worth returning to the core idea behind this conversation. Behavioral science reminds us that decisions aren't made in calm, rational conditions. They're made emotionally through shortcuts, under pressure, and only later explained with logic. So here's the real question to sit with. When conditions are not ideal, when time is short, information is complete, and the stakes are real, how does understanding human decision making actually show up in the way that we communicate, design offers, or lead change? That's where performance is decided. If you want to keep thinking about how ideas like this translate into real behavior, decisions, and systems, not just in theory, but in practice, I explore that more deeply in my newsletter, where ideas are pressure tested against what actually happens in the real world. You're going to find links in the show notes. Thanks for listening. And remember, until next time, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.